The day Karren Lockley showed up on my farmland in her ridiculous wedge heels and leopard print reading glasses, waving a clipboard like a sword, I knew she was about to try something stupid. What I didn't know was that she'd go full tilt crazy and try to seize my entire property under a bogus HOA clause. Let me back up a bit. My name's Waylon Cross. I'm a 54-year-old combat vet-turned-organic farmer. Bought this 100-acre spread just outside Wilmont Ridge 10 years ago. Quiet, peaceful, perfect for a guy who'd seen too much noise and chaos. When the developers started building the Wilmont Creek estates right up against my southern property line, I didn't blink. Figured they'd leave me alone, big mistake. The HOA came with it. And with the HOA came Karren Lockley. Karren's the kind of woman who thinks laminated lanyards give her power. Short, stiff blonde bob, always in pastel sweaters like she's running for PTA president of hell. She got herself elected HOA president the second the subdivision was finished. From that day on, she treated the entire cul-de-sac like her personal monarchy. Now, my land's not part of their HOA. That's important. I made sure of it when I bought the place. But ever since the neighborhood popped up, Karren's been trying to push her rules over my fence. First, it was complaints about my barn paint color, then my tractor's unsightly parking near the property line. Last month, she actually had the gall to call the fire department over a flammable haystack. They showed up, looked around, and left laughing, but Karren didn't. Mr. Cross, she said one morning, standing just inside my gate without permission. We need to have a serious conversation about the impact your lifestyle is having on Wilmont Creek estates. Pretty sure we don't, I replied, not even looking up from my irrigation panel. She flipped a page on her clipboard. There have been no less than 17 complaints from HOA members about noise, odors, unsightly equipment. 17 people live in that neighborhood. Well, no, but multiple complaints have been filed. That's not the point. Yeah, it is, I said. You're trespassing, again, and you have no jurisdiction here. Karren's face twitched. She hated being reminded of facts. We'll see about that. I should have known that wasn't an empty threat. 3 weeks later, I got a certified letter from the Wilmont Creek Estates HOA. It claimed my farmland again, not in their jurisdiction, was in violation of structural harmony codes, and that due to a recent annexation agreement. My property was now under HOA governance. Karren had forged some kind of document and filed it with the county. And somehow, some overworked clerk had processed it. That's when she made her move. I came home from the feed store one afternoon and found a giant metal sign bolted into the ground near my driveway. Notice of reclamation property now under HOA review pending redevelopment behind it. A line of orange plastic fencing that ran down my entire front pasture. And 2 hired security guards in cheap vests leaning against a white HOA pickup truck. She was trying to take my land. I parked my truck and walked straight up to the guards. Who told you to be here? One of them shrugged. We got paperwork from the HOA, said this land's under review. You know this is criminal trespass, right? They exchanged a look. I suggest you call whoever sent you and tell them you're leaving before I start naming you in charges. They left, but the sign stayed. So did the fencing. And Karren, she doubled down. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my barn door. Pending HOA approval, all agricultural activity must cease until reviewed by the board. Livid doesn't even begin to cover it. I spent the next 3 days knee-deep in property records, county filings, and every zoning law in the book. And what I found nearly made me laugh. Karren had filed a fake annexation document. It had forged signatures, including mine and a stamp from a notary who didn't exist. I brought it to the county clerk's office, and their legal team went pale. But I didn't stop there. See, what Karren didn't know, what no one in Wilmont Creek Estates knew, is that I'm the silent majority investor in the Wilmont Creek development. The entire HOA board's salary, the landscaping contracts, even the community pool's budget. All funded through a trust I created when I helped bankroll the development 6 years ago. Why? Because I wanted to control what got built next to my farmland, but I never expected the HOA would go rogue. Karren thought she was fighting a farmer. She was actually trying to steal land from the man paying her HOA's bills. I decided to let her dig herself deeper. Over the next few weeks, I played dumb. I let her install more signs. She even started mailing out redevelopment surveys to homeowners, asking what they'd like to see built once the farmland is reclaimed. She was planning to bulldoze my barn. I started recording everything. I installed trail cams. I got drone footage of the HOA truck trespassing. I recorded Karren standing on my land, ranting about turning this eyesore into something upscale. I even caught her on video bragging to another board member about getting rid of that stubborn hick. That was the final straw. I called an emergency meeting of the Wilmont Creek Estates HOA board. Karren didn't know I had the authority to do that. When she walked into the clubhouse that night, heels clicking like she owned the place, she stopped dead when she saw me sitting at the head of the table. "Waylon, what are you doing here?" I leaned back in the chair and folded my arms. "This is my boardroom, Karren. What are you talking about? Let's talk about the fraudulent annexation you filed and all the criminal activity that followed." The board members looked confused. I passed around printed copies of the forged document, the fabricated notary license, and screenshots of Karren's texts to the county clerk demanding immediate action on the annexation. One board member, a guy named Pete who just moved in last year, looked horrified. "Karren, this is a felony." Karren tried to laugh it off. "That's ridiculous. He's just mad I'm enforcing the rules." "There are no rules that allow you to seize someone's land," I said. "Especially not the guy who funds this entire HOA." That shut her up, dead silence. Then I dropped the final bomb. "Effective immediately, I'm freezing all HOA discretionary spending. That includes your salary, Karren, and I've already filed a criminal complaint with the county." Her face went from red to white in seconds. "You can't do that." "I already did." Karren didn't say a word as she walked out of the boardroom, her heels tapping loud and uneven across the vinyl tiles. The rest of the board sat in stunned silence, no one daring to meet my eyes. I let the moment stretch just long enough before pushing back from the table and standing. "Meeting's over," I said. "I'll be in touch through legal channels. And anyone who continues to act on Karren's instructions from this point forward will be considered complicit." I left them sitting there, mouths half open, surrounded by copies of her forged documents and the county's preliminary fraud review. The next morning, I paid a visit to Detective Reuben Watts at the Wilmont County Sheriff's Office. Reuben was an old friend and a sharp investigator more comfortable in steel-toed boots than a dress uniform, and one of the last people you wanted to lie to. He read through the forged annexation paperwork, the video evidence, and the drone footage in silence. Then he leaned back, tapped his pen on the desk, and blew out a slow breath. "She filed this with a fake notary," he asked. "Used a name that's not registered anywhere in the state." "I already had a paralegal from the county clerk's office confirm it. And she used that document to authorize private security on your land and to mail out redevelopment proposals. She also attempted to suspend my farming rights." He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. "That's criminal impersonation, falsification of public records, and attempted land theft. At minimum, might even be conspiracy to defraud if she looped in others knowingly." "I'd like to press charges," I said. "And I'd like your office to investigate whether she misused HOA funds in the process." Reuben didn't hesitate. "You got it, but this won't be quiet. She's deep in that community. You ready for pushback?" "I'm used to incoming fire," I said. "This is just a different kind of shrapnel." He cracked a rare grin before picking up the phone. "Then let's get to work." By the end of the week, the sheriff's office had served a warrant at Karren's home. They confiscated her laptop, phone, and boxes of HOA paperwork. The news spread fast. By Saturday morning, a small crowd had gathered outside the community clubhouse, murmuring under their breath as deputies carried out evidence bags. I stayed out of it. Let the facts do the talking, but Karren didn't go quietly. She showed up at the county courthouse 3 days later with a lawyer in tow, one of those flashy types who wears cufflinks in a town that doesn't need them. They tried to file an injunction against defamation and accused me of launching a personal vendetta. Problem was, they didn't realize the deputy county attorney had already opened a criminal case file. The judge dismissed their motion before they even finished presenting it. And just like that, the tide turned. I started getting calls from homeowners in Wilmont Creek Estates. Some were furious not at me, but at the fact they'd been misled. Turns out Karren had been making decisions unilaterally for months, bypassing formal votes and redirecting community funds into special projects that no one approved. One guy, Henry, a retired electrician, told me she greenlit a landscaping contract for triple the market rate. Then, it came out that the company was owned by her cousin. Another family found out she'd denied their exterior paint request while approving her own remodel, despite their colors being identical. People were furious. But more than that, they were embarrassed. They'd let her run unchecked for too long. One of the board members, Tanya, reached out to me directly. She was younger, maybe in her 30s, and had joined the board to improve community outreach. She'd clearly been misled. "I didn't know about the annexation stunt," she said, as we sat across from each other at the local diner. "I thought we were just discussing neighborhood expansion. She told us it was exploratory, nothing more. You signed off on anything? Absolutely not. She kept the documents under lock and key, said she'd handle the legal side. She handled it all right." Tanya looked down at her coffee. "We should have pushed back sooner, I'm sorry. You weren't the only one fooled, but now you've got a chance to fix it." She looked up, eyes sharp. "What do you have in mind?" I laid it out over the next hour. With the HOA's finances frozen, the board was in disarray. No one knew how much had been spent, where the funds had gone, or what contracts were still active. The only way out was a full audit and a member-wide vote to elect a new interim president while the investigation unfolded. Tanya agreed to help rally the homeowners. Meanwhile, I had my attorney file a civil claim against Karren personally for damages. The property line had been altered in the county's system based on her forged annexation, which meant I had to spend money and time to reverse it, not to mention the security breach and unauthorized fencing. The claim opened the floodgates. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 other homeowners filed complaints. One woman, a nurse with 2 kids, discovered Karren had fined her for grass height violations while waiving her own late HOA dues. Another man found out his driveway repaving request had been denied, despite identical work being approved for Karren's street. By the time the county audit team arrived, the HOA office looked like a crime scene. Stacks of records, missing receipts, and an entire hard drive that Karren claimed had crashed mysteriously 2 days before the sheriff's warrant didn't matter. The backups were on the HOA's cloud storage and she hadn't wiped those. The audit revealed over $70,000 in misallocated funds across 2 years. Landscaping overcharges, bulk purchase orders for non-existent materials, and multiple reimbursements to an event planning firm that didn't exist on paper until someone found out it was registered to her husband's name. The board voted unanimously to remove her from office. Tanya was elected interim president. Her first act was to issue a public apology to the homeowners and formally rescind all actions Karren had taken regarding my property. I still wasn't done. At the next County Planning Commission meeting, I stood up during public comment and proposed a zoning amendment that would permanently prohibit HOA governance over adjacent agricultural land without a full county review and a 3/4 supermajority vote by both parties. It passed unanimously. Karren's trial date was set for early fall. She was charged with falsifying public records, criminal trespass, and fraud. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county prosecutor wasn't interested. Too many people had been affected. Too much money had vanished. As for the neighborhood, they started showing up at my farm stand on weekends, buying produce and shaking my hand. One woman brought me a homemade pie. Henry, the electrician, offered to rewire the barn lighting for free. It wasn't pity, they just wanted to make it right. Tanya visited again a few weeks later, this time with a binder full of proposed bylaw changes. "We're learning from this," she said. "Won't happen again." "Good," I said, "because if it does, I'll be waiting." She gave a rueful half-laugh. Somehow I don't doubt that. I nodded toward the fence line where Karren's orange plastic had once stood, Funny thing about boundaries, I said. You cross them without respect, eventually you find out how sharp they are. She didn't argue. And for the first time in months, the land felt quiet again. The first court date rolled around during the tail end of summer just after the last tomatoes were pulled and the sheep were rotated to the northern pasture. I wore my cleanest flannel and boots with the least amount of mud caked on. Nothing fancy, just enough to show I wasn't rattled. Karren showed up in a tailored navy blazer 2 sizes too tight across the shoulders, her lawyer trailing behind her like a nervous intern. She didn't look at me as they walked into the courthouse, and I didn't expect her to. The courtroom itself was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday. Not because people liked court drama, but because word had spread through Wilmot Creek estates like a prairie fire neighbors who once nodded politely at each other across driveways now sat in rows with arms crossed, staring daggers at the woman they'd once elected. Judge Halberd, a no-nonsense type with a voice like gravel and a stare that could strip paint, called us to order. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. The forged annexation paperwork had been verified by 2 forensic document analysts. The fake notary had never existed in any state database. The county clerk testified that Karren had pressured her office multiple times to expedite the annexation, using legal terms she clearly didn't understand. But what turned the room was the HOA debit card records. The county investigator, a soft-spoken woman named Maribel Clarkson, took the stand with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. She explained how Karren had contracted a landscaping firm for community beautification that billed the HOA for services never rendered $20,000 worth. That firm, it turned out, was registered to an address that belonged to a shell company under her brother-in-law's name. The room stayed silent, except for the sound of pens scratching furious notes. The defense tried to shift blame, claimed Karren had been misinformed by a third-party consultant, that it was a clerical error gone wild, that she'd never meant to actually seize the land. But when the prosecution played the video of Karren standing in my pasture, saying she'd finally get rid of that stubborn hick, the jury didn't flinch. Judge Halberd ordered her held on bail pending sentencing. Her lawyer protested, but the judge cut him off with a single raised hand. She used a forged legal document to justify private security occupying someone else's land. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a felony. She was escorted out in cuffs, her eyes finally locked with mine as she passed, not rage, not even shame, just disbelief. As if she couldn't fathom the idea that her game was over. Outside the courthouse, a few board members and residents gathered in a loose circle. No one said anything for a long while. Then a tall man with deep crow's feet and a tie that looked like it hadn't been loosened in 30 years broke the silence. "You think she actually thought she'd get away with it?" he asked. "She didn't think," I said. "She assumed." Later that week, Tanya invited me to sit in on the first open board forum since Karren's removal. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me, and I figured if they were rebuilding, it wouldn't hurt to see how they handled it. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, which no longer had Karren's framed certificate by the entrance. In its place was a bulletin board filled with handwritten suggestions, notes of apology, and offers from residents to help with cleanup and repairs. It didn't feel like damage control, it felt like a neighborhood waking up after a long nap. Tanya stood at the front of the room holding a thick folder. Her tone was steady but unflinching. "We've reviewed every financial transaction from the last 2 years. What we've found is unacceptable, and we're implementing new oversight procedures immediately. No single board member will have full control over contracts, budgets, or enforcement actions ever again." One man in the back raised his hand. "What happens to the fines she issued illegally? They've all been voided," Tanya said. "And anyone who paid them will be reimbursed from the fund once the restitution process is complete." A few people nodded. Others just stared, processing it all. Then she glanced at me. "We'd also like to formally apologize to Mr. Cross, not just for the seizure attempt, but for the months of harassment leading up to it. This board failed to protect its residents from overreach, and were committed to making sure that never happens again. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded once, slow and deliberate. They didn't need a sermon. They needed to feel the weight of it. After the meeting, a young couple approached me near the punch table. They introduced themselves as Lee and Jordan, said they'd bought their house 2 years ago and had been afraid to speak up when things started going sideways. She fined us for leaving a garden hose on the lawn for one night, Lee said. We thought it was petty, but we didn't want trouble, Jordan added. We didn't realize how far she'd go, though. If you ever need help with anything, you let us know. I thanked them and gave them directions to the farm stand. They left with a promise to stop by next weekend. But just when I thought the storm had passed, something new hit the radar. The county zoning office called me in, not for a violation, for a warning. Apparently, another HOA, this one from the adjacent development, Sycamore Grove, had submitted a request to integrate community standards across neighboring properties. It was worded vaguely, but the implication was clear. They were trying to use the fallout from Wilmont Creek as precedent to expand their influence. The zoning director, a wiry man named Ellis, handed me a copy of the proposal. I read it twice, heartbeat steady. They waited for the fire to burn down, and now they're trying to move into the ashes, I said. Ellis nodded. It's not illegal to propose a standardization request, but if they get enough signatures and the county council doesn't push back, it could open a door. You'd be grandfathered in, but any new development around you might not be. I asked how many signatures they had. About 24. How many do they need? 200. Still far off, but it was a spark, and I wasn't about to let another fire start. I went back to the neighborhood, not just Wilmont Creek, but Sycamore Grove too. This time I wasn't checking fences or filing claims. I was knocking on doors. I explained what had happened. I showed them the proposal. I told them what standardization meant in practice. Control over fence styles, paint colors, lawn chemicals, even holiday decorations. Some listened politely. Others got angry, but more importantly, most had no idea the proposal had even been submitted. That night, I started printing flyers. I partnered with a local librarian to host a public queue and at the community center. I brought in Ellis from zoning as a guest speaker. I asked Tanya to explain what unchecked HOA power had done to her board. And when I spoke, I didn't talk about revenge or lawsuits, I talked about vigilance. We all want peace and order in our neighborhoods, I told them. But when you hand too much power to too few people without checks, you don't get order. You get entitlement. You get abuse dressed up as regulation. The petition to block the Sycamore proposal filled up in 4 days. Over 300 signatures. The county council voted it down unanimously, and just like that, the door stayed shut. The land was safe. The board was reformed. Karren was awaiting sentencing for 3 felony charges, but more than any of that, the people had changed, and so had I. The first time I saw Karren after her bail was revoked, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in a grainy security photo the sheriff's office handed me, taken from the back of a moving van she'd rented under a fake name and tried to leave the state with. They caught her 3 counties over, in a diner near the interstate, using a prepaid debit card and wearing a floppy sun hat like she thought she could blend into a Sunday brunch crowd. The district attorney filed additional charges the next morning: bail, jumping, obstruction, and attempted evasion of prosecution. Her lawyer withdrew the same afternoon. While the legal machinery caught its breath, I turned my attention back to the land. My property had been restored in the county records, but the damage ran deeper than paperwork. The perimeter fencing had been cut in 2 spots where her so-called security team had installed temporary gates without permission. A few irrigation lines had been trampled. One of the outbuildings near the tree line had a padlock she installed that I had to cut off to get back inside. And someone had knocked over my weather station, shattered sensors, punctured casing, like they were trying to erase any evidence I used to monitor the soil. I didn't call Ellis from zoning or Tanya from the board. I didn't file claims or demand reimbursements. I just poured concrete footings for a new gate, replaced the cameras with higher resolution units, and started keeping a written log of every vehicle that passed the gravel road near the southern edge. I wasn't angry, just done pretending these people played by the same rules. The county's restitution hearing was held in a smaller courtroom with paneled walls, a table with 3 chairs facing the judge, and a clerk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The prosecution laid out the financial damages: fencing, lost produce from the weeks I had to suspend operations, legal fees, and the cost of reversing the fraudulent annexation. I didn't speak during the hearing. My attorney handled it cleanly, but I looked straight at Karren the whole time. She wore beige. Not khaki, not tan beige like wet sand. No makeup, no jewelry, and still somehow managed to look like she was about to lecture someone for leaving a shopping cart in the parking lot. She didn't meet my eyes once. Not even when the judge ruled in my favor and ordered her to repay $58,000 in damages over the next 4 years, or face asset seizure. After that, I figured it was finished. But then Detective Reuben Watts called me again. He asked if I could come down to the station. When I walked into the interview room, he had a stack of HOA financial ledgers in front of him. Not copies, originals. He didn't say anything for the first minute, just flipped pages and highlighted lines with a yellow marker. "These came from a box in Karren's crawlspace," he said. She didn't report it during the initial search. Her husband turned it over during a divorce deposition. I raised an eyebrow. Divorce, filed the day after she was denied bail. Apparently, he didn't want to be married to a felon who forged land deeds. Can't say I blame him. He turned the binder toward me. "You see this line item?" I leaned in. It was a payment to an organization listed as Community Compliance Consulting with a monthly retainer of $4,000. "That's not a real company," Reuben said. "We traced the tax ID. It routes through a shell registered in Nevada to a law firm that specializes in administrative laundering." She was skimming. She was paying herself through a fake consulting firm, and she wasn't alone. 2 other board members received payments from the same firm under different service descriptions. What kind of services? Neighborhood behavior analysis and policy enforcement logistics, which is legalese for nothing. It's made-up fluff to move money. He leaned back in his chair. "We're building a racketeering case." I stared at the open binder. On an HOA, on a criminal enterprise masquerading as one. It was surreal. These people had been holding bake sales, issuing lawn citations, and pretending to represent the community, while secretly embezzling money through fake firms and fake votes. It was a full-scale grift, and Karren was the architect. "Why wasn't this caught earlier?" I asked. "Because she buried it under just enough real transactions to pass casual audits, and because no one thought to look until you pushed back." The RICO charges were filed 2 weeks later. 3 members of the original board were arrested. One tried to flee to Canada and was picked up at the border with a suitcase full of burner phones and petty cash. The 4th turned state's witness and handed over email chains, internal memos, and even voice recordings of board meetings where Karren discussed how to pressure non-compliant residents into selling. That phrase, non-compliant residents, was used repeatedly, and I wasn't the only one on her list. 2 families in the subdivision had been targeted for enforcement escalations because they refused to pay arbitrary fines. One had a child with sensory issues and had installed a privacy fence taller than the HOA allowed. Karren had fined them weekly until they caved. Another had an above-ground garden that she claimed was a visual nuisance. She sent violation notices every other day until they sold and moved out. The prosecution built a timeline. They showed how Karren used intimidation, forged notices, and fake policy amendments to push people out and open up properties for redevelopment under companies connected to her family. It was a land flipping scheme posing as neighborhood management. The trial took 8 days. Karren was convicted on all counts: fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, forgery, obstruction, illegal use of HOA funds, criminal trespass, attempted property seizure, bail jumping. She was sentenced to 10 years in state prison with eligibility for parole at 5. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. No outbursts, no tears, Just the sound of her chair scraping against the floor as they led her away. Outside, Tanya met me near the courthouse steps. She looked exhausted but lighter, like someone who'd finally dropped a weight she didn't know she was carrying. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "No one ever does," I replied. "We've dissolved the board. The homeowners voted to terminate the HOA entirely." I blinked. "The whole thing, effective next month. We're converting to a voluntary neighborhood association. No enforcement powers, no fines, just a community forum and shared maintenance for the park. That's the smartest thing I've heard all year." She looked over at the courthouse doors. "We let her run unchecked because we thought she had authority. She didn't, she just had volume." That evening, I walked the southern edge of my property for the first time in months without checking over my shoulder. The air was cooler, the soil underfoot dry and stable. A barred owl called from somewhere near the pines. I stopped to check the new camera pole I'd installed near the bend, tightened the mounting bracket, and clicked through the last few days of footage. Nothing out of place. No pickups, no security guards, no HOA trucks, just wind and farmland. The next day, I hosted a harvest dinner at the barn. No flyers, no announcements, just word of mouth. Families from Wilmot Creek came in trucks and minivans, carrying folding chairs and casseroles. Tanya brought homemade cider. Henry, the retired electrician, showed up with his dog and a cooler of smoked ribs. Lee and Jordan helped string lights between the rafters. We ate on long tables made from old fencing boards. Kids chased each other through the hay. No one talked about Karren. They didn't need to. The land was still mine. The people were still here. And the rules, the real ones, had finally been rewritten, not by force, not by vote, but by the simple act of standing up and not backing down.